Hello, everyone. Good morning or good day to you. Um, my name is Andrea Botazato. I am with Texas A&M University, Texas Agrilife Extension Services. Welcome to our Enology webinar series. I am really excited today to see people from literally all over the world. We have Greece, Italy, the Czech Republic, France, Romania, Moldova, Poland, Germany, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and of course the United States, and of course Texas. So to all of you, I say hello. I hope you're staying safe and healthy out there. A little bit of housekeeping before we begin. The presentation will take about 40 minutes or so. There will be a Q&A session at the end. You can type your questions in the question box on your screen there, and we will have a chance to go through all of them at the end of the presentation. Also, this is a favor I ask you all at the end of the webinar, if you can take 1 minute of your time to fill out the survey that will pop up on your screen. It really helps me, and it helps this series continue. So I really appreciate that. Without further ado, let us start our presentation. Today we're talking about tannins in winemaking, and our presenter is the wonderful Eglantine Chauffour from La Motabier in Bouquet-Vasselin, North America. Thank you, Eglantine, for being here with us today. And I give you the scene.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm very excited to be here, and it seems like a very international attendance that we have today, so it's great. So my name is Eglantine Chauffour. I'm the winemaking product manager for La Motabier and Bouquet-Vasselin, North America. I'm based in California, Santa Rosa, so yeah, I'm in US right now. So we are going to talk about tannins in winemaking, their application, where they come from, and the different molecular structure with associated with different role in winemaking. I'm just going to stop the video so you will be able to focus more on the screen. Okay, so tannins, so they are part of a wider family, which is phenolic compounds. They are molecules that are found in most of the plants. Actually, they are mostly produced as an answer, as a response of stress or disease to protect the plant. They have many applications in winemaking, but in the many different industries. Actually, their name comes from the tanning industry, which they use tannins to rot-proof the skin of a cow or animals and remove the protein. So they are also used as antimicrobial in like medicine, antioxidant in cosmetics. So there is many different applications, but today we are going to focus on winemaking. So phenolic compounds, let's look at their family. We can divide them in two categories, which are the hydrolyzable and non-hydrolyzable tannins. In the hydrolyzable tannins, we have the gallic tannins that come from gallnut or tara nuts. Gallic tannins are often used in Chinese medicine for antimicrobial and antioxidant property. Then ellagic tannins, they come from oak and chestnut. So you can see the molecule is a little bit more complex, and we find them in wine when we age our wine in oak barrel or if we use oak chips. The second part is the non-hydrolyzable tannins or phenolic compounds that we find in grapes naturally. There is the flavonoids and the non-flavonoids. So the non-flavonoids are the easily oxidable phenolic compounds. They are phenolic acids, they are hydroxycinnamic acids. They are the ones that are responsible of all the initiation of oxidation reactions. So we usually don't want these compounds in the wine, but they are in the flesh of the grapes, so they are very easy to extract. In the flavonoids, we have three categories: the flavonols, They are small phenolic compounds that usually participate to co-pigmentation and they are associated with mouthfeel. We have anthocyanins. Anthocyanins are responsible of the color. You're probably very familiar with this molecule. We talk a lot about it, and we will today. And then you have the condensed tannins. Condensed tannins can be present in grape seeds, which are the small polymers, usually 2 to 16 units of catechin and epicatechin, very reactive with other compounds, but also often bitter. Then we have the skin tannins. So the condensed tannins coming from grape skin, they are much bigger molecule, 3 to 83 subunits. They give the texture to the wine. They are smoother and less reactive. Then finally, we have condensed tannin coming from exotic wood, which is usually quebracho and mimosa. They are small polymers. They do look very similar to a catechin. They are very reactive. We use them mostly to react with protein, so as an antioxidant. So we use them on to inhibit lacase or polyphenol oxidase. So if you look at this family of the big phenolic compounds, only 3 of these compounds are actually tannins. We have the gallic tannins, the ellagic tannins, and the condensed tannins. The other one are phenolic compounds participating to wine mouthfeel, wine color, and wine parameter in general, but they are not tannins. This category of tannin have different applications. So gallic tannin will be used as antioxidant, antioxidasic. They react strongly with protein, so protein removal, but also in terms of tasting, they taste bitter and they are pretty rough. Ellagic tannin, they are good to buffer the redox potential, which means make the wine less sensitive to oxidation or to reduction. We just make a buffer into the wine, so the wine just move less towards one way or the other. It's a good antioxidant, and they react with sulfur molecules, so they tend to clean up aromas in the wine, especially reductive aromas. The last category, the condensed tannins, they are very good for polymerization, so they do help to they participate to mouthfeel, but also color stabilization. They have a good antioxidasic and protein removal action when they come from exotic wood. Then usually tannins from the seeds are seen as green and bitter, but it depends the maturity of your seeds. Tannin from the skin are the silky, smooth tannins that we really want, and the exotic wood tend to be dry. Okay, so different categories of tannins. I would say 4, in fact: gallic, ellagic, condensed tannin from grapes, and condensed tannins from exotic wood, with different application. If I summarize, we have antioxidant, antioxidasic, and protein removal. These we can regroup them as actions that are more protective. We will focus on this action during harvest because the tannins we are using are pretty aggressive. They are very reactive, which means that they react strongly with protein and oxygen radical, which means that they also react strongly with our salivary protein, which makes them dry and rough. So we want to work with these tannins and this application at harvest, at the beginning of the process, so we don't have any residual tannins in the wine or they have time to integrate. The next application is to stabilize color, and we will talk about this during fermentation. And then the aromatic enhancement or mouthfeel balance are more action or application that we use during aging or finishing. Okay, so you can see that the origin of the tannins impact actually the chemical structure that is directly relating to their application in winemaking. Another thing that can impact their application, their reactivity, and their quality is how we produce them. So I'm just going to tell you very quickly how we produce them, since we are talking about the use of tannin. We are talking about your own tannin from your grapes, but also tannins commercially made that you will add to wine. So it's pretty straightforward. You have to select the raw material, which, depending the action of the tannin you want, depending your objective, you will select garlic tannin, an ellagic tannin, or condensed tannin from grapes or seeds or exotic wood. Then we are pre-treating the raw material. So if we are talking about oak, for example, we are going to toast the oak sometimes. If we are talking about grapes, we can rinse the grapes, skin or seeds before we extract the tannin. The extraction can be made with different solvents, so with alcohol or water, or a blend hydroalcoholic solution, temperature and maceration. At La Motabier, we use mostly water. So we extract our tannins in water. We get a lower yield like this, but we get a higher purity. So that's our objective is really to focus on purity. Once you extract the tannin, you have a solution. You need to make selection of these tannins. So you want to make sure they are codex, which means they are legal, and you want to purify them. So we do a high purification of the tannin to make sure we don't have a lot of acid phenols, or in another word, the non-flavonoid category I told you about that are promoting oxidation and also precursors of volatile phenols if Brettanomyces is there. Once you purify and you make your own formulation, we arrive to the drying process, which we dry and granulate it, but we have a specific process that makes our tannin instantaneously soluble. That's very specific to La Motabier, but some people stop at the selection at the liquid format. Some people make it powder. That depends of your supplier. Okay, so there is many steps where we can control the quality, the purity of the tannins, so their action in the wine. So that was just to explain you what we do, but it's a process that is very common, at least until the liquid form. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit more about application in winemaking and how we manage our tannins from harvest to bottling. So the first step will be to actually focus on extraction of your phenolic compounds. We are talking about the use of tannins, but obviously the first tannins we want to have is the tannins from our grapes that we spend a lot of time growing. So we're going to talk about how to extract them and the different speed of this extraction. One important thing that you have to know is that tannins are not so water soluble. So that's why when we extract them in water, we have a very low yield, and it requires a higher temperature and a longer maceration time. But when you are making wine, the first thing you're extracting is your anthocyanins, which here you see as pigment. Then your tannins will come later with time and with also the production of alcohol, which makes them more soluble. The skin tannins, then when you arrive towards the end of the fermentation, that's where you extract your seed tannins. So it's important to understand the different kinetics, so we understand what action does favor which type of tannins. Okay, so basically, how can we improve the skin compound extraction? You can use crushing. Crushing is a good way to break down the cell walls and to extract more of the compounds from the skin. But obviously, you're going to extract also the tannins from the seeds, which, remember, are a little bit bitter and rough, so they are usually not always wanted, but also you're promoting oxidation. So with crushing, you extract more, but you expose more your anthocyanin and tannin to be oxidized. The second aspect is to use temperature, so you can do a cold soak. Cold soak allows you to basically extend the time of skin contact. So you will extract more anthocyanin at the beginning, but some of your water-soluble tannins will be extracted too. So you will have more skin tannins extract it too, and this can allow you to reach your peak of tannin before you get too much alcohol and you extract too much of the seeds tannin. Some people use saignée, or draining, so you just concentrate. Basically, we are removing juice, so we are increasing the amount of skins compared to the juice, so you are concentrating all your tannins by doing this. Sulfur has a very many double face or double sided actions. On this one, sulfur is acting as a solvent, so it does degrade a little bit the cell walls of the skins, but also it does act as a solvent, so you will extract more tannins. Then sulfur can also have a bleaching effect, so it will bind with anthocyanin, making them lose their color. So, and sulfur, as you know, has many impacts on the aromatic point of view, and also antimicrobial point of view, antioxidant point of view. So there is many different points on sulfur, but it's important to know that it does act as a solvent. Then you have the option of using maceration enzymes, so pectinase that has been developed specifically to degrade or to lose down the cell walls of the skin to help the extraction of tannin, extraction of anthocyanins, and also extraction of polysaccharide present in the skin. One important point here is to use maceration enzyme and not clarification enzyme when you are talking about extraction from the skin. If you use clarification enzyme at this moment, you will make your grapes as mushy, and you will basically have a soup. If you make in red, and if you use them in white, it's gonna be a disaster in your press. It's gonna be clogging everything, and it really makes it very mushy. So make sure you use maceration enzyme. Lamotabie, we have an enzyme that is highly purified, highly concentrated, specifically designed for maceration of red grapes, which is called Enology Crush Red. Talking about temperature, the thermovinification, flash détente, can be a good approach. Booker Vaslin developed a machine that is extractive, that goes with thermovinification, that allows you to extract more of your skin compounds. So we do see a huge impact on the color. We extract a lot of tannins and anthocyanin doing this process. Then if you ferment at higher temperature, of course, you're going to extract more phenolic compounds, but from seeds, so both of them. And then you will have actually more polymeric pigment. So higher fermentation temperature will go with stable color. You will promote the interaction tannin-anthocyanin. Cap management, there is many different ways to manage your cap. You can do délestage, you can do punch down, you can do punch overs. The type of management you do and the amount of time you do it, especially between beginning of fermentation or end of fermentation, will have a strong impact on which one you extract. So doing it early, you're going to promote the extraction of water-soluble compounds, which are more anthocyanin and some of the skin tannins. If you do a lot of cap management later on, you will extract much more seeds tannin. Extending maceration, again, you're extracting more seeds tannin and polysaccharide. Okay, so there are many ways that exist to extract the skin compounds, but it's very important because that's what allows you to really get the potential of your grapes. Then you can work with what you have to protect it and to stabilize it. Okay, so that's basically my next point is protection of these compounds. So, and that's where you will start to use enological product. So you extract all your anthocyanin and you extract as many tannins as you can. Remember that first of all, you extract your anthocyanin, and the anthocyanin are actually compounds that you really want in your wine because they are making your wine as a red color, but also they are very sensitive to oxidation. So we are going to talk about this. Then you want to maintain your tannins from your grapes, and these tannins will strongly react with protein. So you want to make sure you don't lose them reacting with the protein from your grapes. So what can happen basically is that, and that's happening all the time in every grapes, you will have a phenolic acid usually, but phenolic compounds, but these are mostly promoted by the non-flavonoids that are extracted from your grapes. That with oxygen on juice, we are talking mostly about enzymatic reactions. So oxygen and polyphenol oxidase or lacase, if you have botrytis, will become a quinone. On wine, this reaction can happen much slower, and it will be a chemical reaction. But let's focus on juice now. So you make a quinone. This quinone is highly reactive and can react with glutathione, can react with your aromatic compounds, but can also react with other phenolic compounds, promoting a polymerization that will be exactly the same reaction that what happened on in an apple. When you cut it, you can see that very quickly the apple gets brown. That's the phenolic acids and the PPO that react together to make it brown. But also banana skin, avocado, you will have the same results in this fruit. It's the same compound and same enzymatic reaction. But also basically this leads to a loss of your phenolic compounds and browning. Okay, so we don't want this to happen. The second reaction that we don't want to happen is that your tannin that you extract from your grapes, so you work hard to extract your tannin, they will react with the protein you're extracting from your grapes too, forming an aggregation and precipitating. So we are losing the tannins like this. So at this step, to avoid this, we are using sacrificial tannins. We call them sacrificial or kamikaze tannins. They are tannins that are usually or gallic tannins or tannins that we use from condensed tannins extracted from exotic wood that has a strong action in protein removal. They can inhibit lacase and PPO. They can improve color stability by protecting your anthocyanin from oxidation and protecting your tannins from reacting with protein. They usually improve clarification, and in global, they preserve the grape potential. How they work? It would be like this. So you imagine you have your wine with your tannins that you extracted, and then you have one that you put sacrificial or kamikaze tannin into it. So we increase the amount of tannin, but also we are using a tannin that reacts more with protein than our own tannins. So in a normal case, you will be like this. You have this amount of protein. Half of your tannins will react with the protein. When you add sacrificial tannin, your sacrificial tannin react first with the protein, which means that basically that's the protein, that the tannin left. So you can see that once they precipitate, using a sacrificial tannin really allowed you to preserve a lot of your own tannins, which means you preserve the full potential of your wine. The application, so at harvest as soon as possible, actually. So I know that in Texas you have a lot of traveling. Grapes can travel for a long distance, so it's a good thing to add the tannin at the vineyard in this case, so your grapes are protecting during the traveling time. Then the dosage and how depend of every suppliers. I'm talking mostly about Pro Tannin R, which is our sacrificial tannin. We use 120 to 180 grams per ton, and we can powder it directly on grapes. No need to dilute it in water. Just want to show you some results, just to show you what a sacrificial tannin can do. So here you have an example of a wine with botrytis. We are looking at the unit of lacase activity. And basically, so 4 units of lacase activity is actually high botrytis contamination. You can see that in juice we have a high contamination. If we use 10 grams per hectoliter of the Pro Tannin R, we reduce to 1, which means you go at a level that is a low contamination. With 20 grams, we completely inhibit the activity of the lacase. The interesting information here is that in wine, lacase is actually still going. So if you do nothing, you think you are fine, but in fact your wine still has the lacase activity active in it, and it will promote oxidative, premature oxidation and browning very soon. So your wine will completely lose aging potential. While if we use the tannin, we can inhibit completely the lacase. As a result, here is the color of the wine. You can see the only difference between these wines is the addition of the protannin R, which is a sacrificial tannin. You can see it's pretty self-speaking. You see the result by looking at the color. Another trial where I want to show you how much phenolic compounds we can preserve and how much color we can preserve. This analysis has been done after malolactic, and just the difference is the addition of the protannin R at harvest. And you can see, so yellow is yellow, red is red, and purple is purple. And the green point is the amount of phenolic compounds. So we basically protect, like we end up with double of phenolic compounds, so we managed to protect half of them. In the control, they got lost with oxidation and reaction with protein, while in the protannin R, we maintain them. And this, you have the direct answer with the color as well. If we look even longer term, you can see that if we, so this is looking at the stability of the color after fermentation during the first racking and the second racking. And you can see that as time goes, our wine is actually getting more and more stable in terms of color. And the only difference is the addition of a sacrificial tannin. So what I want to show you here is that adding a sacrificial tannin can give you a very impressive result in terms of color, intensity, color stability, but also you can imagine mouthfeel, because you preserve a lot of your grape potential, and this is a long-term result. So by just using a tannin that sacrifices himself on grapes, you really maintain your potential and express the best of your grapes. Okay, so that's one application of the tannin that is very important. Second, actually, yeah, third point here, but second application of tannins would be to stabilize color. So the first thing is, obviously, if you extract a good amount of anthocyanin and tannin and you protect them, you should have enough to actually have a stable color naturally. But if you're lacking on tannins, or if you do extract too much anthocyanin but not enough tannins, you can still work on stabilizing color. A very quick reminder here on what is stable color and why you have to stabilize it. We have anthocyanin, as we talked previously, that are easily extractable from our grapes, but they are also easily oxidable, and they can react with many compounds, but many of them just promote the loss of this color. What we want is to stabilize it, and to stabilize it, we have to make them bind with tannins. There is different way for this. We can promote condensation. Sorry for the misspelling here. You can have a complex anthocyanin tannin that will look like the molecule that you see here and will promote a color that is more on the deep red purple. This usually requires presence of oxygen, and it is a condensation that can happen during fermentation. So it happens when you do open pump overs or punch down, where you can actually give oxygen. Then you have the tannin anthocyanin in absence of oxygen. I know the molecule look very similar, but in fact they are reverse. So I just put you a picture here just so you can see, but they are reverse pigment, and they are more red. Red, sometimes they can turn to brown. Then we have the most stable molecule you can have in the family of color. in winemaking, which is an anthocyanin bonded to a tannin with an ethanol bridge. Ethanol is produced in presence of oxygen, so you do want, usually we work on this end of alcoholic fermentation or between alcoholic malolactic fermentation, or also end of malolactic fermentation, but before we put sulfur. Okay, and we need free anthocyanin, we need free tannins, and we need oxygen and ethanol to produce ethanol. And the last one that gives you this red, actually it's more red color, is condensation direct with ellagic tannin. Ellagic tannins are the tannins from the oak. As you can see, the molecule is a little bit more complex, so it's a little bit harder to promote this type of interaction, but this happens during aging, when we put the wine in contact with the oak, but also when you use oak chips during fermentation, or oak tannins during fermentation. So that's the stable color. The other option that we have is co-pigmentation. Co-pigmentation can happen with polysaccharides, so plant polysaccharide, but also monoprotein, or flavonols, which is the third category of the phenolic compounds present in grapes. It will have a hyperchromic and bathochromic effect, which means you make the color more intense and you make the color more blue, purplish. Okay, so like very bright color. This happens usually at the beginning, so you want to promote this at the beginning of the fermentation to make sure you protect your anthocyanin. The bonds are weaker, so it's more protection. It's more happening in young wines than for wine that aged for a long time. When I say long time, I'm talking about a few years. We go to a condensation type of reactions. Okay, but co-pigmentation can last few years, and it's usually what gives this really intense color in young wines. And this will depend on the ratio co-pigment-pigment. Obviously, the pigment has anthocyanin, and pH and temperature of the wine. So, which tannins are the most reactive to promote very stable color? So as you can see here, usually we are working with smaller tannins. So the best tannins for this, the last molecule is obviously condensation with ellagic tannin, so this is oak. But the three others, we are talking about small and very reactive molecules. So short chain of condensed tannins, so very short chain of the skin tannins, or short or like chain of seeds tannins can be good for this type of reactions. Okay, but we are talking about condensed tannins. So which type of condensed tannins are we talking about? As they can come from different parts and different degree of polymerization. So here I'm just going to show you, it's a pretty cool test that we look at the polymerization by ethanol. So we basically have a solution of ethanol, and we put tannins into it, and we are looking at the haze is going to form. So we are looking at the haze intensity, which means how efficient are the tannins to react with ethanol. So it shows the efficiency of stabilizing color, and how fast the haze appear, which show how fast the tannins react. And this is the type of results we have. I show you this graph because I wanted to show you how catechin, which are seed tannin, and grape tannin, which here are short condensed tannins from skin, can react. And then we use this test to develop a product. It is called Softan V, focusing on stabilizing color. So you can see here the reaction. Basically, you have the haze intensity and the time here. So catechins are actually producing less haze and in a slower version. So catechins are not the best to produce the most stable molecule, which is reaction with anthocyanin and ethanol. Okay, so but grape tannins are very good. They go very high, especially the one in red. They go very high in turbidity, and they are pretty fast. Then obviously, since we were developing these tannins, that's where we went with, which is Softan V, which is the fastest to react, and also the one that creates as much haze as a grape tannin. The Softan V is a catechin that is bonded to a plant polysaccharide. So we are basically promoting a fast reaction with anthocyanin and ethanol bridge, and we are stabilizing this molecule. This molecule doesn't move anymore because it's bonded to a polysaccharide. Just to show you some results, so to show you how efficient it can be to use tannins during fermentation to promote quick stabilization and protect your anthocyanin from reacting with random tannins and get lost. Here we added Softan V at beginning of fermentation, 30 grams per hectoliters, and you can see in a Pinot, 3 months after malolactic, we are looking at the total phenolic compounds, the tannins, the color, and the stability of the color, which we look at the delta NTU after a test cold hold. So the lowest is the delta NTU, and the more stable is the color. In a Burgundy, in the Pinot, 3 months after Malo, in a Cab, 3 months after Malo, and in a Grenache that has been thermovinified. Okay, so you can see that in all the wine we are improving the color. Here, we both of them are 7 and 9% more of a total phenolic compounds. In terms of tannins, it's really different, but Pinot tend to have very little tannins, so if we can really protect them, we have a much higher increase. That makes sense. Then in terms of color, we have 16 and 13% of intensity, color intensity additive. But if you look at the stability of the color 3 months after malolactic, this is incredible, because basically we made a wine that is completely color stable with a Softan V, which was completely not before. So you can see that the results are pretty impressive, and you make really total different wine when we are looking at the stability of the color. Then in this Grenache here, this is 6 months after alcoholic fermentation, we look at the loss of color, and you can see that basically the control lost 39% of its color, while when we add Softan V, we lost 23 or 20%. So we lost much less color, which means that we did stabilize it. We got a lot of success with this tannin across states, across varieties, and across winemakers. So I just wanted to share here with you one comment of Christian that has been elected the winemaker of the year in 2017, that really liked it, especially for the effect on the color and the effect on the mouthfeel without changing aromas. The next step is to favor co-pigmentation. I told you you can do it with also a polysaccharide. So I just want to show you that there is not only tannins to do this. So sometimes you actually have grape varieties that are too rich in tannins and too much tannins. And so in this case, we will look at another option to stabilize your anthocyanin without adding extra tannins, because you already have too many. Okay, and here we look at manoprotein. This is a table to show you that manoprotein are not all the same, but they will have an impact on astringency. They reduce astringency. We can look at the control compared to 2 different manoprotein. They improve color stability, as you can see, and they increase sweetness perception. They all do this. Manoprotein are polysaccharide coming from the yeast. So naturally, you will have them released. Naturally, you probably observe that they do have this effect, because when you age your wine on yeast lees, you can see that the wine gets smoother, the wine gets less astringent, and the color is more stable with time. But if you don't have time, or if you don't have good lees, you can add them commercially produced. So we've produced Nature Soft, which is a manoprotein focusing on color stabilization. Just wanted to show you it exists. There is other options than tannins to stabilize color, and we have pretty good results. Same test than before. you can see that the control here is not stable, while when we use Nature Soft, we make the control stable. Nature Soft has been used during fermentation, and the test is done 6 months after malolactic. So there is a long time frame there. Okay, the last category I want to talk about, and it's gonna be much shorter, but that's actually a very interesting application of tannins. It is aging. So we can actually use tannins for aging. And in this case, we will, or pre-bottling, fine-tuning. So we saw that there is different tannin that can be used at different stage. When we use them for aging, finishing, or fine-tuning, they have to be more refined. They have to have a higher purification level, because we are really talking about targeting one goal without having side effect. We don't want to bring up astringency. We don't want to bring up bitterness in this situation. So there is two big categories of tannins that we can use during aging or pre-bottling. Some will be for a technical purpose. So technical application would be to regulate the redox potential, so protect from oxidation, prevent or treat reduction. And on this, we will work with ellagic tannins coming from oak or gallic tannins at very small, low dosage, because gallic tannins can be very aggressive again. Then we can also use tannins to increase the tannin matrix. So this would be if you have grapes that were poor in tannins, or grapes with a higher yield that don't have a good ratio of skin tannins versus seeds tannins, so you didn't extract so much to not have too much seeds. We can add grape tannin, condensed tannins from grapes, to promote the polymerization, to have a smoother structure, but also to have a better color stabilization. And the last category would be to just improve organoleptically speaking. So this would be pre-bottling, and you can really have amazing effects on balancing structure, mouthfeel, tannin texture. You can increase roundness and length by adding tannins. I know it sounds crazy, but in fact, too much tannins can be balanced with extra tannins. Just a different tannin. So sometimes you can feel you have an aggressivity on the finish of the wine, but if you actually add tannin that will fill up the meat palate, you will not feel aggressivity, but you will just feel one full piece. You basically put the missing piece of the puzzle that makes your wine complete and bigger, instead of just cutting the edge with a fining. So it can really help increasing roundness and balance, but also it can increase complexity on the nose, and it can clean some aromas. Okay, so the beauty of these tannins for pre-bottling is that you can always try it. You can set up bench trials. It's very easy. I have sample kits that I can send you. I'm happy to spend some time with you explaining you how to set up these tannins. We can do virtual tasting, because right now that's our only options, but we can do many there is many trials you can do that takes like 15 minutes, and you already see what it does, so you don't go blind and add in your tank. I want to show you two examples very quickly of what a tannin can do, but this is an example of a tannin from grapes. It's a Vinitan Advance, which is our 100% grape tannin. Again, we purify it, so low acid phenols and high concentration on oligomer. We focused on an application which is balancing mouthfeel. Mostly what I want to show you is this graph here that show how we are looking at the salivary protein index, which is related to astringency. So we look at how much salivary protein react to the tannin and dry your mouth. And again, it sounds crazy, but you can see the control is in dark blue, and then the addition of tannins are in lighter gray. You can see that when we add tannin to the wine, we reduce the reaction with salivary protein, so we reduce the perception of astringency and dryness. So adding tannins will allow you to reduce this perception. Why? Because we basically promote the polymerization of these tannins. So tannins that were very short and very reactive with protein are now as a medium molecular weight that don't react so much with protein and let your salivary protein alone basically do their job of lubrification, which allows you to have a smoother texture. So this tannin allows you to increase the mid palate, balance the wine structure, but also reduce astringency perception. It works on color stabilization too. These tannins can be added during aging, but also during finishing, just pre-bottling. They are completely filtrable and stable in wine. Again, that's something you can try. Another tannin I want to show you, so that's exactly the same thing that I just showed you. Again, we look at the salivary protein interaction index, and you can see that when we add here, we are talking about the soft tan FT, which is a blend of oak tannins with polysaccharide, but we are reducing this index, so we are reducing the astringency. Where I want to focus your attention on these tannins is this graph here, where we look at many different wine from Europe, so from Italy, Spain, Croatia, France. We added the soft tan FT, and we look at the sensory threshold for volatile phenols. And what you can see here is that every time we add the soft tan FT, we increase the sensory threshold of the volatile phenol. Volatile phenol are the bread taint, is what we associate with negative. It's when breads produce aromas such as barnyard, smoky, pharmaceutical, wet dog, you know, all these beautiful aromas that you probably don't want in your wine. So adding the tannin allowed you to actually increase the sensory threshold, which means that you decrease the perception of these aromas. So I thought it was a very interesting study to show that some tannins can do this too. Usually these tannins are coming from toasted oak. Okay, so our soft tan FT or soft tan finishing allows you to reduce the astringency perception, but also allows you to reduce the threshold, to reduce the perception of volatile phenol, and makes your wine much more complex. So here is how you can do a bench trial. Again, like, this is something I'm telling you, but it's something you can see yourself. You can try it. It's very easy. I put 50 ml in a glass. I can send you this little trial bottle. You put few drops in your glass. 5 drops in 50 ml will give you 5 grams per hectoliters, and you can taste immediately. Usually wait like 10 minutes to taste, just the time to set up the trial and make sure everything is integrated. Feel free to contact me after this webinar. I'm happy to send you a kit and to set up like a phone call with you to go over and speak about it and how to use it. So as a conclusion of today, we saw that there is 4 different categories of tannins in wine. We have the gallic tannins that work mostly as antioxidant, antioxidasic, and protein removal. So we would use gallic tannin mostly on grapes at harvest. Ellagic tannin, they act as antioxidant, they act as redox potential, so they can be interesting during aging. And they clean aromas. We saw the soft tan FT can help you reducing the sensation of the perception of volatile phenol. But they can also, toasted oak can also react with reductive aromas and help with reduction. Condensed tannins from grapes are very good for color stabilization, but they also are used to compensate lower extraction or lower tannin content from the grapes, to balance mouthfeel and to boost fruit and to clean aromas. Condensed tannins from exotic wood are usually used at harvest as sacrificial tannins because they are very good for antioxidasic and protein removal, and they are smoother in terms of mouthfeel than gallic tannins. Managing phenolic content in winemaking, the first step is to extract as much as you can from your grapes. We saw there is many different approach. The most targeted approach is to use maceration enzymes. Then you want to protect what you extracted from your grapes. So use sacrificial tannins on grapes as soon as possible, which means as soon as you pick the grapes. You can stabilize your color during fermentation by using tannins or manoprotein. That's usually the most common product that you use, depending your original tannin content from your wine. You choose one or the other. But also tannins can be used as increasing aging potential, mouthfeel balance, and aroma cleanliness, and adding complexity. This is something you can do during aging or pre-bottling by doing bench trials. Okay, so thank you very much for your attention. You can find many information on our website. We also do webinars a little bit shorter. I'm sorry I went a little bit longer this time, but that you can find on our website, bvnorthamerica.com/webinar, and you can email me if you have any questions. And then I guess I'm gonna let Andrea now look at the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Eglantine. So, yeah, we have a few questions, but first, Lorena from Argentina says hi to you, Eglantine.
Yes, hi, Lorena.
So, first question: what is the impact of pH on tannin extraction? That comes from William.
So usually, I'm not sure actually how strongly the pH impacts the tannin extraction, but usually on lower pH, so all the enzymes that are the pectinase that release or lose down the cell walls of the grapes works better in lower pH. So they do have, you have a better extraction at lower pH usually.
I think I can make a comment on that. I believe there was a study from Japan that looked just at that extraction of tannins at different pHs in wine, if I'm not mistaken. And they tested 3 different levels of pH, low, medium, and high. And I believe for the high, which was around 4.2, which is not uncommon in Texas at all, the extraction was much lower. For the tannins, because they bound to polysaccharides in the skin. Yeah, I think if I remember correctly. So yes, the extraction is lower with higher pH. Okay, I would say so. Yeah, I hope I'm right.
Yeah, well, I know that in terms of the natural pectinase will extract less at higher pH, so it goes with the study you saw as well.
Cool. All right, next question. What can you say about the alternatives to the oak barrel for wine aging in terms of the tannins that those add to the wine and the impact on the final color and mouthfeel they can produce? This coming from Eduardo.
So Eduardo, so basically using, barrel alternative will be, we are talking about oak chips or oak staves or oak powder, I would say, but any like oak pieces, I would say, would work the same way than the barrels. Extraction is just faster because you have a bigger interaction surface to extract. Then you don't have as much oxygen. So if you use like micro-ox and you already try to replicate how much oxygen you have going through the barrel, you can have exactly the same effect in terms of color stabilization and mouthfeel. Then if I compare to oak tannins that are just tannins that are extracted in soluble form, you will have the same impact in terms of color stabilization, and you should be even better than barrels or oak chips because you don't have a physical support for the color to fix. It's I'm just gonna tell you like more a question that is, when you do age wine or if you use oak chips during fermentation, you can see that when you remove these oak chips or when you clean your barrel is red, or the oak chips are red, which means that some color from your wine went on it. So you do fix color, but you lose some as well by just they fix to the wood surface. If you use oak tannins as a soluble form, you will not have this loss. And I hope I answer good.
Thank you. Yeah, you did. Aren't longer tannins more astringent than shorter ones, whereas the smaller ones are more bitter? This coming from Herman.
So yes, there is many studies on the length of the degree of polymerization of the tannins and how we perceive them. So some studies are showing that the very long chain are actually astringent, but we don't really know. Like there is not like a precise number of polymerization that will say this is astringent and this is not. But usually, yes, you're right. The shorter chains, so seed tannin, for example, that are very short polymers, are usually more bitter, and the very long chain of tannins can be astringent, or even if they get too long, they actually will lose them because they get too heavy and they precipitate.
Yeah, and I think it's just not just the degree of polymerization that influences their effect on mouthfeel and taste. I think it's the shape of the polymer too, and if the polymerization has happened under oxygen conditions or not. So I think it's more complex. There's no straightforward answer. I think it's yeah, the question is more complex than just bitter and astringent.
Completely true.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Next question is if we are hand picking into crates, not splitting the grapes, and the grapes travel for a short time, is it still beneficial and practical to add the sacrificial tannins? From Nikki.
So usually I would say if you travel for a short time and the grapes are hand-picked, so they are not macerating in juice, I would say that it's better to add the sacrificial tannin at crushing or at the reception when you arrive in the winery. You will have a more efficient use of the tannin. So yeah, I would say add it later. Once you are processing the grapes and you already you expose your grape content to oxidation. Then if you do harvest, machine harvest and travel for a long time, so you have grapes that are already open, macerating in juice, you want to add it at the beginning. But in your situation, yes, the sacrificial tannin would be more for reception.
Thank you. The next question is, when is the best point to put sacrificial tannins in? Is it in the grape bucket, which might remain in the fridge even for one night, or at crushing? This is from Vasileios.
So it goes with what I just answered. I think like it's so the sacrificial. If you the best use of this, so the needs of sacrificial tannin is as soon as the content of the grapes gets released and protein gets in contact with tannins and oxygen gets in contact with the PPO or lacase and anthocyanins and tannins. So if your grapes are completely intact and full, you don't need the sacrificial tannin. You will need it at the moment that you crush them or de-steam them or start to open them. But if your grapes, even if they macerate at cold, if your grapes are actually open and they are in contact with juice, in this case, it would be better to add the sacrificial tannin at this step.
Great. Dragan from Serbia is asking if they can contact you. They work for a winery. He works for a winery that makes wine with an local variety, Prokupak, and can they contact you for a recommendation on tannins based on the variety?
Of course. I'm not highly familiar with Croatian variety, but a Serbian variety, but I'm very happy to learn about it and just talk about it.
Thank you. I believe Aristotelis from Greece is asking, how about white winemaking and tannin use management?
So it's a very good question. It was kind of making the presentation too long, so I try to focus mostly on red. Well, we have so white tannins. We usually don't want tannins in white, and there is much lower content of tannins, but there is a high content in phenolic acids, which promote all the oxidation. So it's very important to avoid this. And so sacrificial tannins are used in white. We usually use different sacrificial tannins. And the reason is, at least at La Motte-Abier, we have a different one. And the reason is that the color of the powder itself, so the protannin R I talked about, the color is dark, you know, as any tannins. In white or rosé, you do want to use a powder that looks much lighter, that will not give you color. So we use sacrificial tannins, but we have to treat these tannins to have a whiter powder. And this will allow you to not promote the oxidation reaction. The other approach is to do fining on juice. And the last approach is to actually promote hyperoxygenation to really push all this reaction to happen. Then you find all the brown color you did, and then you don't have it anymore. So you are stable through time, I would say. So yeah, that's usually how we manage tannins in white. It's everything at the juice stage. Then once you are in an aging phase, you can age with oak tannins, you can add grape tannins, there is no problem. But on juice, you really want to deal with the phenolic acids on white.
Great, thanks. Another question from BIL. If you overdose the sacrificial tannins, will that remain in the wine, or do you lose them anyways?
That's a big question. I think both answer. So you will lose some, but if you really use a lot, too much, it will remain at one point. You know, it's gonna react with all the protein you have. Then I don't know. I gave a range of like 120 to 180 grams per ton. If you go like to 400, you will probably have some remaining in your wine. Then if you go to 200, most likely you will lose it. But it's good to stay in the range that what we are proposing. It's a safe range that will work with the protein without going in excess. Because if they stay, they are not the smoothest tannins that you can add to wine, usually.
Ismail from Michigan says, our problem here is unripe seeds. So those seeds contain very harsh tannins. Do you have any suggestions to improve our wine quality?
Well, yes, you will have to promote the extraction of anthocyanin and skin tannins. And so basically everything you can do on early stage. So I would do, probably you can work on some cold soaking, you can work on using enzyme for sure, or like thermovinification, and then make a very short time on skin when there is alcohol. So as soon as you have alcohol, you go more to the seeds. So if you don't want to extract from the seeds, you have to extract everything you need before you have too much alcohol, and then you press early, basically. Could be an option, but we can discuss more about this. It's a little bit more specific.
All right. Is there any testing with sacrificial tannins in carbonic maceration?
Yeah. Sorry. Yes, there is. People use sacrificial tannin with carbonic maceration. They do. They powder, and actually they use a lot of the powder. They powder it on the top of the tank. So it's because you still have juice, you still have some extraction. So you want to make sure it's protected.
Okay, there's a long message here, so I'm just going to read it out from Samantha. I heard a comment the other day on a winery in central Otago. I was told that they were having difficulty with underripe tannins. While many wineries decided to wait longer before picking, those wineries still had underripe tannins. This particular winery decided to pick earlier. There was still underripe tannin, but the tannin chains weren't as stable, so the effect wasn't felt as much and would precipitate out with age. The wineries that had picked later had still underripe tannins with a more stable structure, and so the effects were felt even after long aging. Can you speak to how tannins develop during a grape ripening and why the example above would be true or not?
Okay.
That's a hard one.
That's a difficult question. So usually what happens is with maturation. So usually what happens with maturation is that your tannins gets actually more ripe. So the seed tannins get actually less bitter, and your skin tannins gets more interesting with ripening. Then what might have happened in your situation is that you had a shutdown of maturity. So even if they waited longer, they might have just concentrate. I don't know. I mean, usually you're talking about in New Zealand. Usually it's not so hot there that you produce over ripe, like shutdown of maturity and drying the skin, but maybe drying the grapes. But maybe it happens that you basically dehydrate your grapes, so you concentrate everything you have, but you are not maturating them. The maturation is shut down, so you are not getting more quality, but you just get more concentration. So this could have happened.
Yeah. And
yeah, I don't know, Andrea. Maybe you have you can?
No, I really don't.
This one.
I don't have enough information about this, about tannin evolution during ripening, unfortunately. But I think what you just said makes a lot of sense. So yes, I agree with you. Last question. It's getting quite late now. So from Herman again. I've had good experience with untoasted oak chips bois frais, bringing more fruity flavors and volume in Tempranillo. Any comparison made with your product?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of cut it in the middle. You used bois frais and
for bringing out more fruity flavors and volume in his Tempranillo.
Okay, yes.
Any comparison with your products?
Yeah, I mean, untoasted oak will usually untoasted oak tends to bring volume and roundness to a wine, which there is some polysaccharide with the oak, so I think we are extracting them as well when we are macerating or being in contact with oak, so they tend to give more volume. Then oak, again, these elagic tannins can help the redox potential buffer, which change the aromatic expression. It doesn't bring you aromas, but it usually can lift the fruity aromas that are from your wine naturally. It's just a lifting effect of the untoasted oak. So any untoasted oak chips or tannins can do this if obviously they have to be well done and not giving you raw oak flavor or like pencil shaving type, but any good untoasted oak will work this way. So I do have these two.
Great. Thank you so much, Eglantine, for a wonderful presentation. Thank you for taking the time to answer all these very good questions. Thank you all for being here today and joining us on this webinar. Again, I'm going to ask you to please take a minute and fill out the survey that's going to pop up. And with that, I will say goodbye and hope to see you next time. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Andrea.